Hello and welcome to my new play and chat video, and in this video I'm playing Watch Dogs on the PlayStation 4. This seems to have become one of those games that people seem to either love or hate, and I really don't understand why. I mean, I've been playing the game, well, admittedly only for a short period of time, but I've been absolutely loving it. I mean, but that said, I do really enjoy open world sandbox games. I like gaming worlds that I can get really involved in. The Grand Theft Auto games, the Just Cause 2 was a game I put God knows how many hours into that, and I would have been able to 100% complete that game had I not accidentally blown the head off a statue that I needed to use to get the achievement or trophy for bowling people over with the head of a statue. I'd gone through the game previously and just destroyed everything and then realised that I hadn't picked up that achievement. But these type of games I love because you can just totally immerse yourself into the game, and they offer such a rich and interactive world. There always seems to be things that you can find to do. Little secrets stashed here and there, and I think these type of games form a really good contrast to the sort of more closed off world. You know, a number of first person shooters, they're not really sandbox worlds as you would call them. Some of the better ones have a degree of openness to them, but by their very nature they tend to be they tend to still have the inherent designs of corridor shooters, which is of course where first-person shooters come from. They make larger worlds, but in a sense it's kind of like they're pushing back the walls rather than creating an open world. I don't mean it's kind of difficult perhaps to explain what I mean by that, but you know that you are sort of pushed along in a certain direction playing the game. Whereas in a game like this, you're just free to roam, do whatever you want. There's so many different degrees of interaction. I mean, I love all of this. There's hacking stuff that goes on in the game that you can find out information on people and stuff like that. It's kind of funny because most people would be appalled by this type of thing in real life, but in the sense of a game, there's almost sort of that kind of degree of interest level, I suppose, in the thought of maybe unlocking something or finding something out within the game, some secrets or something like that, that help drive the plot of the game forward in a particular direction. I know the Assassin's Creed games had that type of thing as well, with the, leading up to 2012, there was the early Assassin's Creed games, especially in the first one, they had a lot of that kind of whole 2012 end of the world, New World Order, secret society type thing going on, and I just thought it was really interesting to try and unlock those secrets within the game. And it's these kind of elements of that, I think, not so much the end of the world 2012 stuff, but certainly not obviously not the end of the world in 2012 now, but in what I've played of the game so far, it's got those similar things, although it's not quite, obviously quite the same type of conspiracy theory. You're not obviously dealing with Templars and Assassins. At least I don't think you are. I mean, I'd say I've played very little of played through very little of what the game has to offer so far, but what I've seen so far, I've really enjoyed. And I think it's a really good game. I suppose, again, it sort of comes down to personal taste, and I think it also comes down to corporate commercial reviews. Some places were giving it 9 out of 10, some places giving it 6 out of 10. And this is one of the reasons I really hate the scoring system that websites give. The scoring systems, to me, create a situation. They create a false perception of what a review should be about. When I've ever done a review, some of my earlier videos were based on doing reviews for games. I kind of stopped doing it because in the end I got a review is a very tricky thing for me to get right, and I just stopped doing it because, you know, I was a lot of the time reviewing old games that I'd played, and I'd played them to death, and that was fine because I felt that I knew the game comfortably enough to formulate an opinion. I don't think spending a couple of weeks with a game personally is enough, because especially these days where games are far more complex. I mean, if you spent a couple of weeks with Pac-Man, then you know you'd pretty much know what the game's about and you know what it's all about. But I would think for a game like this, you know, playing a reasonable number of hours a day, you know, I'm not talking about playing 12, 15 hours a day on the game. You know, obviously in a couple of weeks you've probably finished it and see whatever it's got to give. But I mean, a reasonable number of hours, I think it would be difficult to safely say that you've seen enough of a game. I don't know. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. You know, everybody can extract information out of a game at different rates. I'm one of these people that tends to like mooch around in a game for as long as I possibly can and see what there is to see, and you know, explore virtually every nook and cranny, which is why it takes me forever to complete games, why I have a pile of shame of uncompleted and in some cases unplayed games, just simply because I spend a lot of time doing crazy stuff like this, just stopping randomly, going up to this thing here, trying to see what this is all about, and I kind of failed dismally, which is why there'll be a cut coming up, because I couldn't suss out what the hell was going on or how I was supposed to do this. But you can bet your life I'll be back at this at some point until I figure it out. To me, it's just about getting value out of the game. It's about, you know, seeing as much of the game as possible and getting as much gameplay out of each individual game. You know, because I think the developers will have put a lot of effort into sticking things into the game, and I don't want to miss that. It's a shame to miss it. You know, it's why I never have fully completed Oblivion. It's why I've never fully completed Skyrim, because there's content galore, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because I'll always keep it's something for me to keep going back to the game and playing. Like with the Grand Theft Auto games, there's always something to keep going back and playing, but it does tend to mean that I don't get through games very well at all. But going back to what I was saying, and really this is kind of the main thrust of what I wanted to talk about in this play and chat videos, are modern game reviews. I mean, gaming scores have been with us since game reviews started. That's certainly not a new concept. But I think there's an irrelevancy to it. I think that the problem a lot of people have, and the temptation is there, is when you see a review go up on a website such as Eurogamer or IGN, CVG, you know, GameSpot, Polygon, whatever the website may be, I think there's a real temptation there on behalf of the reader to just skip to the end score and see what the score is. And it kind of makes writing an entire review redundant. I mean, I know a lot of people will buy a game based purely on the score it gets. So, you know, essentially all they're doing is looking to the end of the review, reading the score, and if it scores a 6 or a 7 out of 10, that influences them buying the game. But if they'd read the body of the text, then the chances are that they may have found something that this might be a game that they like. It might, you know, the score might be reflective of the fact that maybe the execution of the game wasn't quite what it should have been. But it doesn't change the fact that this might be a video game that they really like and that they really, really would enjoy playing. And that's certainly happened to me. You know, there's been cases where review scores have been perfectly accurate. You know, Turning Point, Fall of Liberty being a case in point. You know, that game started off with really good concepts, and the first level where you're descending the skyscraper while, you know, New York Harbor is under attack from Nazis in these Zeppelins and these huge battleships and jet fighters and all of this kind of stuff, was really good. And then once you actually got to the ground and pick up a gun, the game sort of fell apart from that point on. and it did deserve the harsh scores that it got. But looking at like another game which also got a very bad score, which was by the same developers, and that was called Legendary, and that was to do with Pandora's box being opened in modern day, and all of these fantasy creatures like griffins and werewolves and God knows what all coming out to play. I actually enjoyed that. I mean, technically it was no great shakes. It was a low budget game, but it worked very well. I thought the mechanics of the game worked very well, and I thought it was enjoyable. It was a new and original take on the first-person shooter genre. And, you know, had I not gone to YouTube and checked out videos and reviews of people that had actually played the game, I would have missed out on that. I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to pick it up, I think, for about £10 off Amazon a few years ago. And, you know, I played it right the way through to completion, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun game to play. Look, it didn't look technically great. There were other first-person shooters look better. There were, you know, other first-person shooters were slicker in their presentation, but it didn't change the fact that this was a fun game to play, and ultimately that's what it's all about. And I think that, you know, I learnt the lesson of review scores being very misleading, and if you are going to read a review, it doesn't matter where the review is from, that's exactly what you should do. You should read the entire content of the review and not just rely on the score at the end. Because there are a lot of games, I mean, that I've read the review and the score hasn't reflected, in my opinion, the score could almost be written by somebody else, as if somebody's just come along and tagged the score on the end, because it doesn't ever seem to fit in with the content of the review. You could read the review and think, well, that game's easily an 8 or 9 out of 10, and it gets a 6 or a 7 out of 10. You know, that can happen, and, you know, it can happen in reverse. You read a review and you think, well, that game, you know, you think that game sounds dreadful, and then the review score at the end, it gives it like a 7 out of 10, which is not a bad score, and you think, I don't see how this game got a 7 out of 10 based on the content of the review. So it's always worth reading review scores. Sorry, God, no. Don't read review scores. Read the text of a review. Read what people have got to say about it. And that kind of leads me into thinking also about the relevancy of corporate reviews. A lot of the reviewers that I watch on YouTube, not so much the bigger channels, I do watch bigger channels as well, but a lot of them I watch, they don't give scores. They just give a summary and an opinion on whether you should or shouldn't buy the game. And I wonder whether or not there's any kind of validity now to taking or putting any stock in, I call them commercial/corporate websites, the websites that basically earn money through advertising revenue and so on and so forth. I'm not trying to say that their reviews are in any way, shape or form untrustworthy, but is there really any point in following what these review guys say? Because in this day and age now, with so many video channels being up on YouTube, and there's so many independent websites that are run by, you know, hobbyists and people that are really into gaming, you know, is there not now a less importance? Because, you know, a lot of these corporate/commercial websites, they sprung up out of video game magazines, and they have that same sort of mentality. Video game magazines, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, and even really, you know, early days at the turn of the millennium, were the only source for news. They were the only place you could go for reviews. The whole internet thing hadn't really taken off as big as it has done in the last 10 years. And you know, for a lot of people, these magazines were the voice of God. I mean, there was no other way. You know, there were very few demos, if any, certainly outside of PC gaming, because you know, demo discs you would get attached to gaming magazines. So it was all very controlled, and I don't mean controlled in a sort of conspiracy type way. What I mean is that you know there was very few independent outlets. You know, you had your official PlayStation magazine, your official Nintendo magazine, your official Xbox magazine. Then you'd have unofficial publications. You know, and the official magazines tended to be able to trump the unofficial ones by having demo discs and video discs and God knows what. And then I think the more lax things became, the kind of video discs started to appear on the third-party independent type publications. Although you know, I'm not too sure whether demos ever reached outside the official capacity. But you know, when you look at certain websites, they still have that mentality. You know, whether or not it's because of where they came from, whether or not it's because of the heritage that they had, but they still have that mentality that sort of their opinion is the only one that counts. And I think that sometimes it does tend to filter down into the review, and you do tend to get a more cynical review. You know, whether or not it's a review that's perhaps more based upon, you know, trying to drum up viewers to their website, you know, trying to, you know, for want of a better phrase, clickbait, you know, get more traffic through, because companies that have paid for adverts on their websites, they do so based on the site traffic that's going on there. So, you know, it's maybe a cynical way of looking at it, but there's also, you know, a practical, real world way of looking at it. I mean, let's all be adults in the room. Let's hold our hands up and say, look, you know, these sites need traffic. These sites need a lot of people going to these pages, hitting these pages, because they pay people to write articles. They pay staff to work on these websites full time. You know, and they need to create revenue. And the only way that they can create revenue is essentially by getting traffic to come through. How do you get traffic to come through? Well, it's going to revolve around interesting articles, you know, maybe, you know, interesting game reviews, and doing things that are slightly controversial is usually the easiest and quickest way that you can get somebody to your website. They also have to, on the flip side, try to maintain integrity, because they can't just keep giving crap review scores to games, because they will lose integrity. So it is a very fine balancing act, but there's a balancing act there all the same that needs to be taken care of. When you go on YouTube, you know, a lot of the time, you know, yes, some channels, they create revenue through views, but I don't think there is as much necessity to be controversial. I don't think there's as much necessity for them to drum up a ridiculous number of traffic. I know some do, don't get me wrong, some, you know, some will, because they get revenue based on video views, but equally there's also a huge number of channels that don't do that. And so you tend to get what, in my opinion, a more balanced view on things. It's less radicalized. You know, people are calmer. They're not, you know, jumping for joy at a game they really like. And they're also at the same time not being overly cynical. You tend to get a more balanced view. And to me, in my, again, this is just my personal opinion, it's making the importance of going to visit and taking the word of a commercial corporate website far less important. You know, because they're not the gatekeepers of the information. They're not the gatekeepers of review scores and opinion that they once were when they were magazines, and then they turned into websites, or were certainly founded on those same principles. You know, they're no longer that. YouTube is a fantastic place where it's opened up a whole new world in terms of game reviews and in terms of opinion. And you know, I will never go and buy a game based purely on one source of information. I will go to a number of sources of information. And YouTube is my primary source now. It used to be these websites, but YouTube is my primary source now. I don't dismiss these websites completely out of hand. I will visit them, you know, to get more out though out of passing interest, as opposed to actually going there and actively seeking their opinion and basing my decision on whether or not I'm going to buy a game based on that opinion. So yeah, I mean, that was pretty much all I wanted to say. You know, I don't know whether other people feel the same way, whether they still, you know, use these websites as a primary source of information, or whether they, you know, now YouTube and it's in, you know, the importance of YouTube. Certainly, I think in this generation going forward, and not just YouTube, I mean, you've got the whole Twitch TV. You can now sit and watch people play live, and you know, you can watch them play through the game, and it can be a lot easier to gauge whether you think you like that game or not. And I think that's more important to me. I mean, if I was gaming companies, and just tying quickly back to my last video with Nintendo, it just makes what Nintendo are doing, as far as I'm concerned, even more crazy. Is, you know, I think it is going to be of benefit to game companies. You know, I don't think that video game companies, whether you're a games publisher or a hardware manufacturer, you know, they themselves must feel that there's a certain liberation of opinion going on, where it's no longer, you know, just they're having to keep, you know, a small sector sweet. You know, that you're going to get more diverse opinion. And certainly in the sense, I think, of games that maybe, you know, in the past would have been dismissed at completely out of hand. You know, I think there's a new lease of life that can be had there for a lot of these games. And I've certainly found that I would have missed out on a number of games had I just taken the larger websites, the commercial corporate websites. If I'd have just taken their opinion as being gospel, I would have missed out on a lot of games that I enjoyed playing. So I think that, you know, there is a certain value now, you know, to being able to go to YouTube and use these type of resources to formulate an opinion on games. So that's it for this video. It was a bit of a hell of a ramble, but I was just curious, you know, as to what other people felt. Did they feel the same? You know, do you guys, you know, still use them as the primary resource, or, you know, do you think that places like YouTube are a better place to get opinion? So anyway, thank you for watching, and stay tuned to my channel for more videos to come.